Good evening. I'm sorry I'm a moment or two late today. It's been a long day. It's been one of those gloomy days out here in Tennessee. We've had a lot of patients come through. I've had a lot of calls today. So I'm feeling a little tired, but we're going to get through this. Now, I know I've been talking about other things that the low carb diet can help with other than weight loss. And we're going to continue on that track a little bit. But today is going to be a science lesson. And you guys have heard me talk about the fact that I've finished a recent certification course. I was going through a course with the Nutrition Network, which is a great organization. And if you are a healthcare provider or health coach and you're interested more in learning on nutrition and nutritional things, please check out the Nutrition Network. Well, as part of that course, I wrote a case study that could potentially be published in a journal. I don't know if we'll get there. I'm just trying to get to, I don't know, tomorrow at this point, but we'll see. I am going to present that case study to you guys. So, this case study is a person who I saw in my clinic. So, I physically saw this person and helped them with their lifestyle change. And I'm going to try to present that to you next week. But today is about the background of it, the background of that case study, the sciencey part of it. So hang with me, and I'm going to try not to get all nerded out on you and give you a bunch of information that's not going to make a whole bunch of sense. But we're going to try to shed light on the connection between two things that seem like they're totally unrelated. And why do they seem unrelated? Well, we could get into that, but it is the relationship between insulin and high blood pressure or hypertension. So the root cause of this is still under huge debate. There's been a whole lot of people who think that it's a saturated fat. Some people think that it's salt. Some people think that it's inactivity. Some people think it's obesity. And a lot of the times when you're talking about hypertension, it's all talking about the risk factors. You're not giving me causes. You're not giving me reasons for it. You're not giving me the root cause. You're just telling me things that are associated with it. Like obesity could directly cause it, or maybe it's just associated with it and it's a risk factor for it. There's a difference that's there. But we're going to dive into this complex relationship tonight, talking about how the two often go hand in hand, elevated insulin and hypertension, and trying to understand the different mechanism of actions that are behind this connection. So about a month ago, we did a little quick talk on what is insulin and why should you check it. And just as a reminder, this is a vital hormone. We need insulin. If we don't have insulin, we do this thing called death, which is not what we're after. It plays a crucial role in our ability to regulate our blood sugar. So if you don't have insulin, you cannot regulate your blood sugar. That's like someone with type 1 diabetes. They can't regulate their blood sugar because they don't have enough insulin. But also there's this condition called insulin resistance that happens when you've had chronically elevated insulin. Your body no longer listens to it and no longer uses it appropriately. And it can lead to that thing called type 2 diabetes. So two different types of diabetes, both are responsible for the impairment of or disuse of insulin that's there. So, how do you know if you have insulin resistance? Well, if you have type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetes, guess what? You have insulin resistance. If you've been told you have elevated insulin levels, well, you have insulin resistance. If you have hypertension, chances are you probably have insulin resistance. But the problem, and what you'll see in my case study when I present it to you, is that so many providers don't check insulin levels to tell you if you have it. They don't have the conversation with you if you meet all these metrics that qualify you as insulin resistant or pre-diabetic, and you don't find out that you have it until, oh, I don't know, you're already out of control with your diabetes. So what are some things that you personally could look for on your own lab work and on your own body to tell if you have insulin resistance? One is if you've ever been told you have fatty liver. If you've been told you have fatty liver, more chances than not, you are insulin resistant and you have high insulin levels in your body. You can look at your waist circumference. So take a plain measuring tape and measure around. I usually go at the point of the belly button and measure all the way around. If you're a man, you want this reading to be, let's see, waist circumference for men. If it's more than 35, guess what? You might have insulin resistance. For women, if it's more than 40, you may very well have insulin resistance. You can look at your body mass index. You take your height and weight, plug it into a calculator online, and you can see if you have it. So if your body mass index is above 30, probably have insulin problems. Potentially, if it's over 26, you have insulin problems. If you get your blood work from your doctor and your fasting blood sugar is above 108, so remember fasting, you've had nothing to eat or drink except water or black coffee, and you're above 108, chances are you've got insulin resistance. Look at your triglyceride level. If you're over 150, we've got problems here. If your HDL is under 50, we've got problems here. If you've ever had gout, you might have this insulin resistance. There's many other measures, many tests like the triglyceride to glucose index and things like that, but these are just some things that you can find in your own basic blood panel with measurements in your home to see if you're at risk for diabetes. Not diabetes, but insulin resistance, high insulin level, and thus diabetes down the road. But notice none of these had LDL cholesterol or total cholesterol listed. They're not in there because it's not a marker. Your LDL is not a marker for high insulin, which can lead to diabetes, which can lead to heart issues, which can lead to hypertension. That's a whole nother topic for another day. But how do you get elevated insulin? Well, I've seen stress do it. So some people who have been extremely stressed out, all of a sudden they start coming in with signs of diabetes. They're thirsty, they're peeing all the time, they're sweating like crazy, and their sugar's high. And when the stress goes away, somehow that goes away. So I've seen that. Some medications, if you're having to take a lot of steroids for something like rheumatoid arthritis or lupus, or if you're getting repetitive steroid shots for hip arthritis, joint issues, stuff like that. Also, statins, the medicine we use to treat cholesterol, create insulin resistance in the body. But mainly it's about what you eat. And what you put in your body either stimulates insulin or it doesn't stimulate insulin. And by far and large, the macronutrient that stimulates insulin the most is carbohydrates, sugars, and then also processed foods. There's some evidence that things like seed oils can stimulate insulin resistance and produce that process. But I want to talk first about fructose. So you've got several different sugars out there, sucrose and fructose. Fructose became very popularized, I don't know, 30, 40, maybe 50 years ago, high fructose corn syrup. It's become rampant in products across through the US. If you're eating a processed food, you possibly are getting that fructose, but it's in other things. It's even in some of our fruits have fructose. That's where it came from. But it's processed different. It's processed in the liver. And what happens is the liver then converts that fructose over converts it over to fat, predominantly triglycerides. So it takes the sugar, this sugar molecule that you're eating, and converts it into fat, which is the triglyceride, which is then out in your blood system that's there. That's why a lot of people think that if they cut down on their fat, all of a sudden they're not going to be having high triglycerides. But no, you need to cut down on the sugar, the fructose, to get rid of your triglycerides. But this excess fat accumulates in the liver and leads to fatty liver. When it accumulates in the liver and you've got fatty liver, there's an interference with insulin signaling. So no, it's interfering with your body's ability to listen to insulin and to use it appropriately. And the body's response is just to increase the production of insulin, and it gets higher and higher. But as this cycle keeps going, you keep eating this, you keep producing the fats, you keep getting fatty liver, it just makes it harder and harder for insulin to be effective. And it's a vicious cycle that leads. So now when the body's breaking down fructose, there's byproducts of it. That byproduct is called a purine. Now, purine goes into the production of uric acid, or uric acid is a byproduct of purine. So you're breaking down fructose, you're creating purines, but you're also creating uric acid. Remember, I said gout was a sign of insulin resistance. And that's because this breakdown in the liver is leading to the uric acid and is leading to the purines, and it's all kind of intertwined in there together. So we generally think that gout is the production from too much meat. You're eating too much meat, you're getting gout. But it's not. It's all back to the sugar. And then when you have an acute gout episode, you can't break down the proteins appropriately. But the root cause is backed up before. You're probably like, Amanda, where in the world are you going with this with hypertension? Trust me, I'm getting there. But this condition, so this process leads to insulin resistance. It doesn't allow your body's insulin receptors to function appropriately. It also triggers an inflammatory pathway, so inflammation throughout the body, which further contributes to your insulin resistance and not being able to listen to insulin appropriately. So now what boils down to basically is things happen in the body to produce more insulin, and the body stops utilizing insulin well, and the pancreas pushes out more insulin in response, and then the cycle keeps going. You eat sugar, you produce insulin, it's too high, bad things happen, you become resistant to it. The body makes more insulin because you're resistant to it and it's not listening to it. And then we keep going through this little hamster wheel that never stops. So, how does this tie into blood pressure? Well, insulin has several mechanisms in the body that directly increase blood pressure. And the first is with sodium retention. So, elevated insulin acts in the kidneys to encourage the reabsorption of sodium. Water follows sodium. So, if your insulin's acting at your kidney to reabsorb the sodium gets more in your body, and the water is getting reabsorbed with it, you have a higher volume. So, imagine a hose pipe and you turn up the volume, you get expansion. When you get expansion, it presses on those walls of the blood vessel and you have higher blood pressure. Now, this is why a lot of people come in when we start them on a low carb diet and they're really worried about salt and taking more electrolytes. And I have to reassure you, if you are eating in a way that doesn't stimulate insulin, your body is filtering out the salt appropriately. But if you're eating a standard American diet in a way that stimulates and requires insulin, then you're going to be retaining more of that sodium. And so then you have to restrict it. So if you're eating low carb, don't have to worry as much about it. The next way that it acts on blood pressure is how insulin acts on blood pressure through the sympathetic nervous system. So the sympathetic nervous system is also known as our fight or flight. It helps us chase away or get away from lions, is how we were always taught in school. But it has other processes. So when you eat in a way that elevates blood sugar and insulin, it stimulates the sympathetic nervous system to increase metabolism to try to bring the body back in balance, because the body likes balance. It doesn't like being off one way or the other. So that sympathetic nervous system is stimulated, our metabolism, our fat burning our energy burning is increased to bring us back in balance. Only problem is that process is not specific just to metabolism. When that is increased from the crappy foods that we eat to bring us back in balance, the stimulation is also put on our heart and our blood vessels, increasing blood pressure. So something that's supposed to be good for us ends up kind of doing bad for us to correct the bad things that we did to ourselves, if you're following me there. That leads me to endothelial damage. So the endothelial is the lining of the blood vessels, the lining of the cardiovascular system. And when insulin is high for prolonged amounts of times, it leads to damage. It irritates them. And then there's this remodeling that takes place, but the remodeling is leading to a stiffer blood vessel. So it's a stiffer blood vessel that doesn't respond to that fluid as well. And when it's stiffer, even when a lighter amount of volume is going to have a higher pressure in it. Sometimes I think I miss my calling and I should have been a plumber, not a nurse practitioner, because I'm understanding this pressure system kind of well. No, I shouldn't have been a plumber. I can't even plunge a toilet correctly, but that's the conversation for another day. All right, so now let's move into, we've got a stiffer wall. There are two hormones that control whether our blood vessels relax and whether they dilate, and that is nitric oxide and endothelial 1. So nitric oxide is the hormone that allows the blood vessels to relax. Well, the only problem in a state of hyperinsulinemia or elevated insulin levels, nitric oxide is impaired. The production of it is impaired, so we don't have as much of it, and our blood vessels stay constricted. Endothelial 1 is a hormone that causes us to constrict. And what happens when you're stimulated by insulin is that the endothelial 1 production is ramped up, and all of a sudden you've got tighter blood vessels that are pumping the volume through. And normally there's this delicate interplay between the two. For example, if you're bleeding out, you want some endothelial 1. You want it to clamp down. You want that to slow down. And if your blood pressure is high, or say you're under a lot of stress and you're clamping down, you want some nitric oxide to relax it. And there's typically this little nice balance. But when your insulin level's high, you lose that balance and it's off kilter and things go in the wrong direction. Now, next place we're going to go is back to the kidneys. We're going to look at the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. Big words, they tongue-tie me a lot, so sorry if I get tied up in that. But this is a vital hormonal system. It controls a lot of things in your body, but it has huge activity at the kidney level. And interesting, insulin directly affects these. So, how does it work? Insulin directly and indirectly stimulates a hormone called renin. Renin activates this renin angiotensin aldosterone system to produce angiotensin 2. It's another hormone. Well, the purpose of this hormone is to vasoconstrict, and it causes blood vessels to narrow, kind of like that endothelial 1. So when AG2 is stimulated from renin, which was stimulated from insulin, the byproduct is to constrict down. Angiotensin 2 then stimulates aldosterone, and aldosterone increases more sodium reabsorption, the same way that insulin did it directly. So insulin directly stimulates sodium reabsorption, but it also indirectly does it through this kind of pathway that goes down through there. So now you've got tighter vessels and higher volume through another hormonal pathway that all originated from insulin. And it's just this vicious cycle that keeps going. And the more it's produced, the tighter it gets. The more you eat the bad things, the more the insulin's produced, the more these bad things happen that increase the blood pressure. There's a new class of medicine out called SGLT, sodium glucose something transporter 2. But regardless, we have these transporters and these receptors in our kidneys as well, and insulin impairs them too. So when they're impaired, the body is reabsorbing sugar and sodium quite rapidly, which also increases volume. So that's another hormone. How many hormones are we up to now that are stimulated all from insulin that encourage more volume and tighter blood vessels? I mean, it's building up. The case is getting high. The last reason that I want to talk about is inflammation. And one of the things that I hear a lot when people go on a carbohydrate restricted diet is when they diurese, they get rid of a lot of fluid, they just feel so much better that their joints ache less. And you're going to see that in my case study. There's a big inflammation component to this that's not just blood pressure. And at first, I thought they were two unrelated things, but the more that I dive into it, they're tied together the same. So a chronic low-grade inflammation is a key factor in insulin resistance. And it's kind of one of those cart, horse, chicken, egg things. Did the insulin cause the inflammation, or did the inflammation cause the insulin? And honestly, I think it goes back and forth. One of them triggers, and then you're back on another hamster wheel that goes a different way. But when inflammation is high, you produce these things called inflammatory cytokines, and they interfere with your body's ability to produce insulin. Therefore, your body pumps out more because it's not listening to it again, and you're not getting the signaling process there. If you ever hear the words reactive oxygen species or oxidative stress, those are byproducts of inflammation, and they're connected in with that insulin resistance and high insulin levels. So all of those go together. But so insulin resistance, and it's a big thing inside of the muscle. Your muscle is your biggest organ group in your entire body. You have the most insulin receptors there because it's the largest muscle group. And if you have inflammation, it interferes with your muscle's ability to break down that insulin and utilize it appropriately. And then that whole cascade starts over again. And there's different things that can cause inflammation. You can have stuff like rheumatoid arthritis, but even just being overweight does it. Your unhealthy diet's a big one. Sedentary lifestyle, stress is a form of inflammation that all builds into it. So just to kind of recap so that we can have the key takeaways, high insulin level leads to insulin resistance. Insulin's important. We need it, but we need it to be used appropriately and need it to use it in the correct balance. Insulin and insulin resistance have many mechanisms that can lead to hypertension. Some of them are direct, some of them are indirect, but it all has to do with the hormonal cascade that originates with an overproduction of insulin, which the majority of the time comes from what we're putting in our body to create that insulin. Most providers don't test for this. Most of the country is walking around not even knowing if they have it because it's not tested for. And you can have these warning signs in your blood and in your body for years before hypertension and diabetes kick in. And you're going to see that in the case study. So we need to start catching them before they knock on our door. And then lastly, know the markers. Look at them for yourself and bring it up to your doctor. Hey, I think I have this. I think I have insulin resistance. what can I do? If your doctor doesn't want to talk to you about what can you do for insulin resistance, I'm happy to help you. And come January, we're licensed in over 20 states and we'll have conversations. And there's some changes coming up with telehealth that's going to restrict your doctor's ability to do telehealth. That will not restrict us because we're a cash pay clinic moving first in January. So the restrictions are only put there by insurance, which is a whole nother conversation for another day. I love it that insurance is just continuing to restrict people's access to care moving into 2025. But like I said, access for another day. So things to look for: find out if you have fatty liver. Do you have elevated liver enzymes? You can have that ultrasound of your liver to look at it. Take your waist circumference. If you're a man, you want it to be no more than 35. If you're a woman, you want it to be no more than 40. Calculate your BMI based off your height and weight. And you really want to be below 26, but you for sure as heck want to be below 30. Pull your blood work out. What is your fasting blood sugar? What is your fasting triglyceride? What is your HDL? If your sugar's above 108 fasting, your triglycerides are above 150, and your HDL is less than 50, we got problems. But the thing is you can fix them before they become bigger problems down the road and cause permanent issues that are harder to fix. You can also look at that uric acid level. Sometimes it'll be borderline high. And, there's a lot of things you can do to be proactive about your health. All right. So until next time, which I'm hoping to present my case study next time. I'm going to see if I can figure out a way to get some cool graphs and things going so you can see the changes, because this lady has made remarkable improvements in her life and it essentially saved her life through the interventions. And I want you to see what's possible because it's really a cool story. So I will see you next week. Stay healthy and don't drink too much sugar and eggnog and all that good stuff during the holiday season. Bye, guys.